Today I have another special guest, an outstanding comedian. I have the pleasure of working him in multiple occasions, and he's a funny, funny man. Uh, he's known as the Truth, but I gave him another nickname, the most miserable man in comedy, and you'll understand why. But let's bring him on. Good friend of mine, Joseph Anthony, son. Hey, hey, Joe, how are you?
Hi, Tony. How are you? I'm this wonderful comedian you're bringing on. I can't wait to see him.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
coming right after you.
oh, good, good, good. Because I don't want to have to live up to that. So one of the nice things about doing all these, I've been doing these virtual shows, is that I don't have to wear shoes. So that's cool. But I want to say right before we begin that, and in all honesty, to you or to whoever's watching, that Tony is probably one of the nicest, most fair promoters I've worked with in my 30 plus year career. And
Thank you,
that's
Joe.
the truth.
I'll give you the check right after. I'll send it to Federal Express.
Thanks, Tony. If you need the address, let me know.
No
And
problem.
not only that, but he's like the Italian voice of Yogi Bear. So that's all I want. Like if Yogi Bear had an Italian accent, you'd be perfect for the part.
Uh, thank you, Joseph. And it's been great working with you the last few years. Before I go into your personal life and ask you a question about the business and all that, I want to play
Right.
a clip of what you bring to the stage. This was recorded at the Borgata a few years back, and so to give people a taste of what you're all about.
Okay.
Let's see it. We're having a little trouble with the internet. We'll go back to that a little bit later.
Oh, I just heard it. Okay.
Yeah, it starts in the face off, but I will try with that later. Uh, so you were
Okay.
saying, when did you start doing
We
comedy?
could we could probably fix the video. Do you have any Asian neighbors that
No, no,
have a
I
mask?
live in a strictly Italian neighborhood. I
Really?
know, you know, I obviously, been traveling with you. I learned a lot of things about you. And one of the things that I remember that if I know you did 30 plus years, but about 30 years ago this year, uh, 1990, you step on your first major break. I would say it's Pips Comedy Club in
Wow,
Brooklyn.
you did your research. Yeah.
I always do.
Yeah. It
Tell me,
actually
go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I
What were you
said
saying?
uh, that must have been an incredible experience for you.
I'll tell you the story. Your phone?
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is it the next guest already?
Yes.
So actually, backdate just a little bit. I uh, after high school, I went into business in a small deli. I went partners, and then I always had this desire to be into the arts and to write, and so I tried freelance writing for a couple of years. But I kind of had a secret desire to do stand up comedy. I used to stand in front of the TV at night on the Tonight Show, during the Tonight Show, and watch the comics. It was always something that I thought I could do because I was always in trouble, always funny in school. So 1989, I took a workshop in New York, and I wasn't getting in, it was a stand-up comedy workshop, and I wasn't getting anything out of it really that what I wanted. The guy who gave the class, I won't say, was a really nice guy, funny comic as well, but teaching really wasn't his forte. And to tell you the truth, teaching comedy is kind of a contradiction in terms. So around maybe the second week of January 1990, I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this on my own. I was living in Staten Island, New York. I go to Pips Comedy Club in Brooklyn, which at the time, its claim to fame was the oldest comedy club on the East Coast. And a lot of people had come up through there, like Rodney and Joan Rivers and Dice. And so I go there on an open mic night, and I didn't tell anyone about it, except I strategically picked the 3 people that would be in the audience to support me. And in those days, open mic night, because comedy was so huge in 1990, that was what we called the boom.
What?
Open mic nights on a Wednesday were sold out. So I had my beer rep from the store, Jimmy, who was probably one of the funniest guys I knew, and he loved humor. He loved Howard. And so I said, he'll know if I'm good. So he was kind of like my professional plant in the audience. Then I had my sister Marie, and I'm the youngest of 5 older sisters.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to ask you about that too.
We get to it. So I had Marie come. She's the next closest in age to me, because Marie and I, when we were younger, we had kind of a kinship about our desires and so on and so forth. So I said, she'll be there for support. And then I didn't tell any of my friends except one. My friend Lenny, who he's funny. He had an accent too. He was born in Naples like you. As a little boy, he grew up in Uruguay in South America. And Lenny had one of those laughs. Just a great sense of humor that, when someone laughs and coughs at the same time, that they make you laugh. Well, that was Lenny. So I said, no matter how I'm doing, good or bad, Lenny will laugh at me or with me, and I'll know how it's going, and I'll feel comforted. So that's how I picked the first 3. Now, first time on stage, I had written some material. It's maybe 2-3 weeks old. I think it's about my mother, because I implored the rule of writing, which is talk about what you know. So what did I know at 20 years old? I knew that my mother was obsessed with things like having the garbage taken out. So I talked about my mother and garbage and blah, 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 right? And it's not going great, And the club was really close, like very intimate, as they say. They literally had stages butted up against the stage. So right down in front, right below me, literally, was a girl at the front table talking to either another girl, her date, or whatever, and it distracted me, So I broke from the little 5 minutes of material that I had planned, and I said to her, in real form, like me, came out, and I said, "Hey, you want to get on stage?" And I quoted what you do to be on the open mic. I said, "You want to get on stage?" I said, "You put your name on a list, you wait, and if they get to you, they give you a microphone, and you get on stage." And the crowd blew up. And it was like the skies open up, and I said, "Oh, I found my calling. Be truthful, and do what you did as a street kid growing up, and just go for the throat." The crowd blew up. I knew better even then, and I got off stage on that note, and I left the hero, man. I walked away. And do you know John Mulrooney?
No.
John was a big deal at that time. John, when Joan Rivers had her talk show, John was her stand-in relief. John was hosting a show called Comic Strip Live. So John was kind of a big deal then. And John was sitting at the bar, and he said to me, unfortunately, he was wrong, but he said to me, "You're going to be a star." And, it was a high, man. It was a high. So that's the story of the first time.
But I got to tell you, actually, I wish I was there during those times. But as you know, I grew up in Italy, and
Right.
my first 5-6 years of America was more about learning English, more than so I missed out on a lot of things, such as like The Wizard of Oz, the movie. I still haven't seen it yet. I
Do you know
know that
my mother
Yeah.
This is the God's honest truth. My mother, I don't know where to look. Should I look at you? Does it look? I don't know where my eyes are. Should I
No,
look at you?
look at me. It's okay. I'm a
Okay, because
beautiful
this,
sight to see.
if anyone is antiquated and doesn't understand technology, it's me.
I'm with
Um,
you.
exactly. Hey, I just watched My Blue Heaven. Did you ever see that with Steve
Yeah,
Martin
that I seen. That I seen.
when he's in the witness protection program?
Yeah.
And he would say, "I'm with you" to Rick Moranis. That's anyway. That's reminded me of that. So the Wizard, my older sisters weren't allowed to watch The Wizard of Oz. To my mother, it was a horror movie. That's the God's honest truth. So you might not be missing much.
I don't know. I know there's a guy that looks like a tuna can, and a cat, a big cat, and I don't know.
Oh, tuna can. Yeah, he looks like what do you say in Italian? Is that Alige?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a giant can of Alige in The Wizard of Oz.
So, hi, Callie, hi, Rosanna, hi, Teresa from Niagara Falls. We got the, I don't know if you can see, but there's people writing down.
I can't because if I jump over to
Yeah.
the live feed, I lose you, and then I'll be totally confused. But hi, everyone.
So, uh, so you were the youngest of how many brothers, how many siblings do you have?
0 brothers, 5 older sisters.
Wow. So you're the youngest. What is
I'm
it
the
like
prince.
to grow up in a house with 5 women, well, 5 sisters, older sisters, and you're the little baby?
Yeah, yeah.
Were they
It,
protective of you, or uh,
I guess they were. As I grew older, I would always consider myself kind of the little big brother because I was the protective one, you know. But as a boy, yeah, people think, oh, that must have been horrible. What was that like? 5 women, and I guess I was too young to understand estrogen and hormones and all that stuff. I just thought they were all clinically insane, which they are. But basically, they dressed me up like a girl, and
I
that
mean,
gave them a rush.
you actually, I do not see you dressed up as a girl.
No,
Like some guys are more manly than others. I do not see you as a girl, and that's a
well, we didn't
compliment.
have a lot of money, Tony. So Halloween came around, and all the other kids, I grew up in a basic middle class neighborhood, not poor, not rich, middle class, and we struggled because my father was a huge gambler, a big gambler. And I could tell. I mean, I learned how to load a moving truck in the middle of the night when I was 7 years old. It would be like, leave that closet. It's not coming. We got to go because we were usually beating the landlord on the rent. But the girl thing, we had 2 costumes. When all the other kids, the middle, they were dressed up in the Spider-Man, the Batman. They had costumes. There were 2 costumes. Either I was a bum. Now to be a bum, you get a stick and a handkerchief. You put it on this like a hobo, and you put some burnt cork on your face, and that's your Halloween costume. You're a hobo, a bum. Or they dressed me up like a girl. So when you get dressed up like a girl for Halloween, you learn how to fight. That's all I'm trying to say.
My costume was fairly cheap as well. As a matter of fact, I didn't buy anything for it. I just put a leather jacket on, which I already owned, a t-shirt, jeans, and I went out as the Fonz.
As the Fonz, right. Yeah, yeah. No, I was obsessed with the Fonz. It's funny you say that. When I was a kid, my friend Bobby and I have an inside joke. Like when I was single and I was crazy and I used to do all kinds of bad things. He used to say to me, because he was more laid back, so he'd be kind of like laid, sitting at the bar watching me in my antics. Dancing, girls, and being crazy and drinking. And he used to say to me, "You are the Fonz." Because as a kid, I loved Fonzie. Did you have the press-on shirts with his picture?
No, I did not, but I did not miss one episode. And in Italy, he was. Growing up, it was number one. Everybody. There were 30 kids in the neighborhood alone doing the Fonz thing. During
He was
it
he was
wasn't
20.
Halloween. It was Carnevale, which is Carnival. It was in February.
Right. I got to tell you a story about Carnivale in
Yeah.
February. We'll go back to that in a second. You'll
Okay.
enjoy this. I just learned recently, Henry Winkler, the Fonz, he was 27 when he got that role.
Yeah.
Didn't he look younger? And
Oh,
that
absolutely.
and that cool guy that Fonzarelli basically played, a cool Italian guy, I guess. You know, grew into this little old Jewish man in
I
movies
know
today,
that
right?
was like, I don't know, Propecia or something. I don't know. Those all kinds of different commercial. I'm thinking that was the Fonz, the coolest guy in the block.
Right. And now he's a little. I just watched him in Here Comes the Boom with Kevin James,
Yeah,
and he plays like a music teacher, a little soft spoken Jewish man, which is really his true to form character. But he was an idol for us in the '70s. It's so funny.
I
And do
actually
you
saw
remember?
talking about Kevin James. I saw him, I think, last year or 2 years ago on tour. It was pretty funny. It was a pretty good show.
I gave him a compliment before he blew up at Governor's in Long Island.
Yeah,
It
I,
was
I
another
was
open.
actually one of the last show I did with Uncle Louis was right at Governor's.
It's a great club,
Yeah,
and
it is.
I lived out on the island. I lived on Long Island. The island, you would think it's in the Bahamas, but no, it's just an extension of New York that's impossible to get to. And I lived out there for 3 years. And the reason I went out there, I was in Staten Island. I'm living in a basement apartment by myself, and my friends were kind of growing up and doing the things you do in your early 20s, and I'm struggling to pay the rent, and I'm starting this comedy thing. So no one was around. So I decided there's a lot going on Long Island, and I went out there for 3 years. In fact, the guys that came out of that scene were Joe Rogan, Kevin James, Ray Romano. The list goes on. Joey Cola and Kevin and I was standing in the back of the room on an open mic night because we all used to get together on like Wednesday nights. And I said to him, I gave him a compliment because I enjoyed his stand up. I said, when you go on, the comics laugh. And when you tell that to another comic, they get it because comics will watch other. We're also not me, most of them are critical and jealous and cutthroat, and we'll watch other comics with the insecurity. And if a guy does something that you think is funny or smart, you'll acknowledge it. You'll say like, that's good. That's it. But seldom do you belly laugh. And Kevin was one of those rare guys that made me belly laugh. He used to make me laugh, And I told him that one night, and that was basically my interaction with him. And shortly after that, he started to blow up.
Yeah, I saw him actually brought him cannolis to come. I did. I was guest of Richie Minervini, which opened up for him. So I talked to Richie and said, you know what? I'll come down. I'll come backstage. So I brought him a nice tray of Sicilian cannoli. Uh, yeah, that was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So it was a great experience. Plus, Richie was also in one of his movies, or actually a few of his movies.
Well, Kevin took care of a lot of the guys that came up with him. He's always taking care of Richie because Richie owned the club.
Right.
Richie and his brother owned Chuckles and Eastside Comedy Club.
Plus, he
So,
was one of the booking agents up to a few years ago for the Borgata.
I know. That's a whole other debacle. But
Yeah.
I was actually supposed to be there right at the start of this. I lost a week at the end of March. I was supposed to do a week there.
Yeah. So that's one of the great casinos down in AC. If you haven't seen it, they have a beautiful, beautiful room up there. So let me ask you a question and I ask everybody that comes to the show, I ask the same question. We know the negative attributes of COVID-19's got. Okay, what's something positive that come out of it?
For me personally, obviously, right?
What's that?
Uh,
Yeah,
my kids obviously had to both come home from college, and that's both a negative and a positive because I got to see them more and I love them and I missed them while they were away. But my food bill has quadrupled,
yeah,
so it's kind of a negative and a positive. It gave me a little time to take a breath, and even a lot of people are like, oh, I'm bored and I'm watching all these movies, and I haven't quite been doing that. At least in the beginning, I was kind of like, oh, this is a time to do things I wanted to do. So I literally blew the dust off of a book that I started writing by hand. I'm like 85 pages into this thing.
yeah.
I started in 2013. So
Oh
I
wow.
started working on that again. And it's going real slow, but yeah, it gave me a
So
little time.
at this pace will be retired before you release it.
Yeah, that's the problem. To answer your question, it gave me time to do a little introspection, kind of looking at my life and saying, all right, how should I use this time? But at the same time, I don't know if it's my personality, probably because nothing's going at the rate I want it to, like, I'm like 16 pages into a rewrite and they suck. I don't know. I don't know. I've been through, as you know, a little bit. I've been through so much in the past 5 years or so
I know.
that it just kind of changed my motivation.
But I gotta tell you, as said, I obviously know things that you've gone through. We've spoken about it in the long road trips as well. But I thought that the way you turned your unfortunate incidents in your life into comedy, I thought it was brilliant.
Thank
You
you.
know,
Thank you.
and
That's a challenge.
obviously, yeah. I mean, like you have suffered multiple car accidents, some really bad ones. But then one of my favorite skits is you being hit. I mean, obviously, I would never wish you any harm. I
Thank
love
you.
you. But the way you turn it into a funny skit, uh, you know, and if I can play it later, I will try. I thought it was
Okay.
absolutely brilliant. I don't know if you want to tell people a little bit, or even a little skit
Yeah,
or
I
something.
don't, I don't, I don't. Yeah, I don't. It's hard for me to do. I'm not a joke teller, as you know. I'm a
No,
storyteller, but I'll give him a little inclination. I mean, basically, when it comes to writing like that, for example, COVID-19. Okay, how did you use this time? What's a positive? I started looking through. Behind me is my office, and it's literally a fire hazard because there's 12 million scraps of papers in here. So I'm like, oh, let me clean the office. But then what happens is I start looking at pieces of paper. I'm like, wow, this is a great joke. This could be a great bit. So I could write for anyone. But when it comes to writing for myself, when people say to me, oh, what kind of comedy do you do? I never used to know how to answer that. I'm like, well, I don't juggle. I don't have a guitar. I don't tell jokes. And I finally whittled it down to I do autobiographical material. So something like that happens. And I say to myself, all right, you got to move on. You're still a comic. What are you going to do? Let's find a way to somehow take what happened, as tragic as it is or was, and find the humor in it. So one of the things that maybe you're referring to is what happened that night, and this is almost a joke verbatim. I decided to go get a cigar around
that's the one I'm
10.
referring to.
Okay, around 10. And now let me preface it by saying that I have, and it's not fun. I have and suffer from something called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which, if people don't know, you may know the term anal retentive.
Yeah.
But I prefer OCD because anal retentive sounds like I'm storing things in my ass for an unnecessary length of time. That's a joke.
Yeah.
So I'm driving. I'm OCD. I'm driving to get the cigar. I'm doing 30 miles an hour right in my neighborhood. The guy in the oncoming lane is doing like 80, loses control, and is coming right at me. So in that 3 seconds before impact, my life did not pass before my eyes, as you always hear. Being OCD, in that 3 seconds, I thought, this is going to delay my plans to have a cigar. Thank you. I'm here all week. Try the veal.
Uh, Now, I'm gonna try in a minute to see if I can if the clip works. But I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, it's a lot funnier on stage. I promise you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think we were together on stage at I believe at Batavia Downs last, correct? I believe it was like
Yeah, that
November,
was great.
September. Yeah, it was a great crowd. People loved you. I love the shirt that you sell.
Leave me alone.
Leave me alone because
Says it all.
I mean, it speaks volume. Uh,
Yep.
who was your favorite? Like a couple of the is that who was your favorite comedians growing up, or favorites? And is there somebody that you so you know what I want to be more like him?
Okay. As most of my answers, it's kind of like a little bit of a multi answer. I know you're like, he's such a long winded bastard. Growing up as a little boy, I listened to Pat Cooper albums. And I didn't even know really what he was talking about. I just enjoyed the sound of his voice. He sounded like my father, and I found him funny. Years later, I got to know Pat, meet Pat, work with Pat, and then looking at the material he was doing in like the 60s, even though it was a little campy, for lack of a better word, compared to today's, edgy comedy, it was outspoken comedy. It was about his culture, his family, stuff that people weren't doing in those days. So I respect him for that. He was my first inspiration in comedy. The guys that I really respected and, sat on the edge of my seat and listened to were a guy named Bill Hicks, who unfortunately a lot of people don't know unless you're a fan of stand up. Bill passed away, I think, drugs, but
Oh, did you freeze up? Let me see. I think he froze up. Let me see if I can actually. What we have him is to show. Um, yeah, we're in a little. Yeah, we're in a little trouble with the obviously with the internet, and we lost Joseph Anthony. Hopefully, will he can come back in. But basically, uh, oh, it's here. All right, let's see if he can come right back in. Uh, but Joe Anthony has been traveling all over the world with his comedy, and he's outstanding. Let me see. All right. No, go ahead. Oh,
what do you mean? Go ahead. I got no picture.
uh, all right. I'm live still, so I got Joe Anthony on the phone. See if we can go back with into our live. Try now, okay?
All right. You want me? I'm gonna come out and come back in
You
because I
got it.
still have.
Yeah. So you'll try to be back in. But anyways, tomorrow we're also gonna have another special guest. Can everybody see us all right? If you can comment on it, it would be great. But tomorrow, 4 p.m., we have another funny comedian, and he's going to bring some different personality and some live music. At 4 o'clock tomorrow, we're going to have Tom Anselon, another fantastic comedian, old school, does a lot of impressions from Britney Spears to Madonna, to Michael Jackson, and he will join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Let me see. Okay. Anybody has any questions? If you want to comment, please do. until we can reconnect with Joseph Anthony. Oh, okay. Let me see.